When does the Bible first appear in the world? And how could the Cambrian explosion explain it as an analogy? Also, what was the first parallel noticed between a biblical narrative and another cultural narrative, like a Greek myth? Welcome to my channel, Parallelmania or Parallelophobia. So when does the Bible first appear? When I was younger, I read a lot about biology. I actually wanted to be a biologist. One of my favorite events in biology is the Cambrian explosion. For those who don't know about it, it's an event that supposedly happened 500 million years ago. It's the sudden appearance of multicellular life forms, hard-bodied organisms, as opposed to prior to that event where there was only unicellular life forms and soft-bodied organisms. So this Cambrian explosion is this not just sudden appearance, but rapid diversification of life that just suddenly happens. And when I think of the creation of the Hebrew Bible, I come to think of the Cambrian explosion because the Bible suddenly appears during the Hellenistic era after Alexander the Great conquered the then known world. The first people to speak of the Bible outside of the Bible are Jews who were Hellenized and were able to write and speak Greek. I don't think it's practical to use the Bible to date the Bible. That kind of internal dialect that you find in the Bible, it's useful, but we cannot really use it to date the Bible. Books, for example, that speak of the Persian era, like Ezra and Nehemiah, a lot of scholars still date this during the Hellenistic age. So it's not easy to date the Bible without external evidence. You need external evidence. And using external evidence, the Bible first appears with the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint. And when people actually start speaking about the Bible and commenting on the Bible, books like Jubilees, for example, exist during the Hellenistic age because they're commenting on the Bible. The Bible suddenly appears during this era. I therefore believe that it's helpful to also consider other external evidence like the Elephantine Papyri, where you have a Jewish community living in Egypt, Elephantine, sometime in the 5th century BC, and they are sending letters to the governor in Judea, which is under Persian rule, Yehud, and they mention many gods, Yahweh along with other gods, as if no issue. They are requesting help from the governor, assistance to build a temple to Yahweh in Egypt, as if the Torah does not exist, as if Deuteronomy doesn't exist. So obviously many Jews scattered throughout by this time due to imperial activity, they don't seem to know an authoritative text called the Pentateuch, the Bible, or the Hebrew Bible, Torah. This comes during the Hellenistic era. So who are these individuals who start to speak about the Bible? There are several. I would like to focus on Aristobulus and Philo of Alexandria. So who were the first individuals to speak about the Bible? We have several, but I want to focus on two, Aristobulus and Philo of Alexandria, during the 2nd century BC and early 1st century BC. Aristobulus was a Greek-speaking Jew who knew the Bible already, the laws and the prophets, studied it extensively, but he was also familiar with the Greek world, spoke Greek, and read Greek philosophy and Greek literature, mythology. We don't have his works. Nothing has been preserved. Just citations from later authors and the church fathers like Clement of Alexandria, Eusebius. They mention how Aristobulus claims that the Hebrew Bible is earlier than Greek writings and philosophy, and that Plato and Platonic philosophy actually plagiarizes the Bible, and that Plato, Eusebius, for example, in one of his works, states and cites Aristobulus as saying that Plato clearly read the law of Moses and meticulously studied it to understand it, and from there created his philosophy. And this was not just Aristobulus. It seems like as soon as the Bible appeared with the Greek translation, many authors were able to see similarities. Aristobulus, again, according to Eusebius, saw similarities between Plato's laws and laws that you find in the Bible. So these are more structural similarities. Again, we don't have his works. He may have noticed specific parallels, specific narrative units in the Hebrew Bible that he thought maybe were similar to Greek stories, but we wouldn't know. When it comes to Philo of Alexandria now, we do have his works. They have been preserved. And he also, like Aristobulus, was a Greek-speaking Jew, highly educated, with a lot of power, and he wrote a lot. He definitely was someone who allegorized. The Greeks, I believe, did invent the allegory. So he was now utilizing this technique of taking texts that may have been difficult to understand if they were taken literally, and allegorizing them. And we will now enter this parallel that he speaks of in his book on commentary on Genesis. This is probably one of the first commentaries ever written that we have preserved. He mentions a lot about philosophy and how that can be applied to the book of Genesis, but let's focus on one parallel that he speaks of. It's between the Tower of Babel and a Greek Homeric myth that his friends would ridicule him about. So if you don't know about the Tower of Babel, it's found in the book of Genesis. The world has gotten violent. Humans are now getting together to build a tower brick by brick so that they can reach the heavens, so that they can reach Yahweh, God. Yahweh gets offended and makes a plan, a counter plan, and acts by confusing the tongues. And this is pretty much an origin story about regarding why other people speak different languages. Philo does speak about in his commentary on Genesis how his friends would ridicule him for believing in that myth. But not just that, they would say, why don't you believe in the Greek side of the myth? In Homer, for example, you have the early humans who are giants who decide to reach Zeus. In order to do this, they plan to heap the loftiest mountains on top of each other, the three loftiest mountains, one on top of each other, so that they could climb it and reach Zeus. There are several variations of this myth, but I believe in Plato's Symposium, there's a version which, after they actually heap these mountains, Zeus decides, Zeus decides also to come down and counteract. In the Platonic version, humans are round and double gendered, so he comes down and splits them in half. There's a lot of similarities between these two tales, though there are differences. You don't ignore the similarities just because there are cultural differences. Cultural differences are important when it comes to comparing these narratives. You would expect the differences, but the similarities are there. And I showed this graph quickly to just, if you could just glance at it and see that. So in his commentary on Genesis, Philo doesn't really dive into the similarities. He doesn't really write much about how he justifies this parallel. It's simply kind of an ad hominem attack. He says that they're kind of impious, even though they're his friends. They just don't understand. They're blind that the Genesis version is more realistic, even though when you kind of think about the Tower of Babel story, just because it involves bricks and not mountains, there's a lot of improbability in that story as well. So just to conclude, briefly discussed how the Bible suddenly appears in the world during the Hellenistic era. how there's not much evidence of it existing as an authoritative text prior to the Hellenistic era. Spoke a little bit about the first people who spoke about the Bible, Aristobulus and Philo, and we spoke a little bit about how Philo noticed a parallel between the Tower of Babel and the early humans, the Elodi, piling mountains to get to Zeus. So technically, this may be the first parallel ever preserved and noticed. So just